So welcome to our first May, June, July, Friday focus on Master Gardeners. I am Natalie Baumgartner, and I'm coming to you from campus here in Knoxville. I'm actually in a classroom at our greenhouse all by myself, properly distanced. And today on our Friday focus, we are going to be hearing from some of the fabulous folks here in Knox County. And so just to give you a little bit of an introduction to how we're going to do this series throughout the next few months, we are going to be on location in different spots, and we're going to be highlighting Master Gardener service and how Master Gardeners invest in their communities, how they collaborate with our different branches of UT Extension and Ag Research, and we're going to be spotlighting a lot of different people in different county programs. And so today, we are actually going to be hearing a lot from not only our Knox County Master Gardeners, but also Knox County Extension agents, Lee and Rylan. And as you know, we are dealing with a little bit of weather out there. And so we are going to start out in the field, and we're going to introduce you, maybe some of y'all for the first time, to Lee Rumble and Rylan Thompson, who are both agriculture extension agents in our Knox County office. Rylan is actually the coordinator of the Knox County Master Gardener program. We are really excited to have him on board. And Lee is his colleague who deals a lot with both commercial and residential trees. And so without further ado, I am going to turn the floor over to Rylan and Lee, and they are out in the field, literally in the UT gardens. Take it away, guys.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and good Friday morning. It's a little bit rainy. I appreciate you letting us go first. My name is Lee Rumble, of course. I'm the Knox County Extension Agent, and I'm also an ISA certified arborist. In 2010, I made the decision to become a certified arborist because I thought it would be a good move for me to make. So excited to be here today, hoping the rains will hold off, and we're going to talk a little bit about, of course, tree pruning. Woody ornamental trees. I'm going to talk a little first about structure pruning of younger, immature trees, and then we're going to move into a little bit more of that mature tree pruning that we'd like to see. So first and foremost, I have, of course, a very young American beech tree here. This is Fagus grandifolia. It's a spectacular tree that holds a really special place in my heart. I actually did my master's research on Fagus grandifolia in Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Beech Gaps. I'm sure many of you have heard of those. But when we think in terms of a residential yard and a new planting that goes into the ground, a lot of times people will go out, purchase a tree, they'll stick it in the ground, and they don't really do a whole lot with it after that. But structure pruning can be a really, really wonderful idea. Now, you don't want to structure prune immediately after planting your tree. You want to let it get established 2-3 years down the road. And then ideally you want to contact either a certified arborist or a knowledgeable tree care person or an extension agent. And of course, go ahead and structure prune that tree. The reason we do this is because ultimately it adds longevity to the life of the tree. It increases the aesthetic beauty. And more importantly, it reduces problems later in life. So real quickly, we'll look at a couple issues that I like to pull out of my young, immature trees. And those are what I call the undesirables. So dead, disease, damage, duplicate limbs, or drooping limbs. Those all need to be culled out pretty early in the life of the tree. If we look at this individual here, we see we have an issue of codominance beginning to form on this individual. So when we think in terms of this tree being 25, 30 years old, we're going to have major issues with these two competing stems. Further, at the same time, we also want to remove any crossing branches, any limbs that rub against one another aggressively. One of those two is going to ultimately lose that battle. So I would definitely promote structure pruning in trees early in their stage of life. That way we can establish a really nice central leader or a central trunk and good scaffold branches off of that main leader. Now, one other thing I'd like to mention while we're here, if you notice on this beech, we do have some injury, nothing too major in the early stage of the tree's life. This will likely compartmentalize and close fully over the long term. But when you are planting that new tree, go ahead and make sure you can see this really nice, well-established trunk flare. If this is, if the dirt level's brought up to here, we know the tree's planted too deep. Another common thing I like to encourage people to do is to leave the lower limbs as many years as you possibly can, because those lower limbs ultimately are going to help to develop that trunk taper. Now with that, I think we're over to another area near a small wetland area right here at UT Gardens. Hopefully the road noise won't get too loud. But what we're going to start with next is, of course, our native flowering dogwood, Cornus Florida. Really spectacular specimen, but I want to show a little bit of the consequences of not early pruning a tree. I know I mentioned on the beach that we wanted that nice central leader. We don't really want issues of codominance with multiple branch units coming out of a centralized location. We all know the consequences of Bradford pears, right? They have numerous branches that originate at one area on the trunk. And over the long term, as these trees, of course, increase, these tree trunks increase in girth, a lot of times they'll ultimately compete with one another. And then we can run into issues with heavy windstorms that can split and separate that tree. So it's really important that we do structure prune our trees early in life. Up here, we have some other issues with crowding, of course, a couple dead limbs. So if we can cull these things out early and develop a really nice central leader, then we can have a tree that really has a great, great amount of life left in it. One other thing I want to mention, you may notice how barren, of course, this tree is on the backside. And that's just phototropism, right? Trees love to chase sunlight. We saw how pretty this tree was on the front side, but on the back here, we have a tremendous amount of shade coming from these nearby pin oak trees. And that's not a bad thing, but over the long run, phototropism, or that chasing of the sunlight, can actually disfigure trees. So sometimes it's nice, even after you've structure pruned your tree, to kind of keep your eye out for the ecophysiology, what's happening around the tree, what's influencing that tree. Because a lot of times those things can be foreseen. Now, it's also important, of course, when we think in terms of tree pruning, it's not just a science, it's both an art and a science. You really have to understand not what to take out of the tree, but what to leave behind in the tree. Because ultimately, it is that structure that is going to create the magnificent specimen tree that we often enjoy. Now, when we also prune trees early in life, that reduces the chances of failure later in life. Oftentimes, arborists don't get called until the problems are already pretty set in stone, and there's not a whole lot that we can do about those problems. By the time you call an arborist and a tree's 20 years old, very often there's little that can be done aside from some other minor cuts that can be made. The problem with that, of course, is that by the time a tree's 20 years old, we're in love with it. It's been established in our garden for many years. We love the foliage, the fruit, the fall colors, whatever it may be. But then we run into issues where the tree suddenly starts to decline. Now, that can be a result of many different factors. One of the common questions I get as an arborist is, well, why is my tree dying? I tell people a lot of times it's very, very rarely one thing that kills a mature tree. It's usually a culmination of factors. It's a spiral of death is what it's going. Maybe we get, a tree that's improperly planted, has some girdling roots early in life. Maybe a weed eater hit it at the lower trunk at some point. Then we came in and we pruned some limbs off of it later in life. Then all of a sudden we hit a drought, and then maybe pests follow that, or pathogens. So it's really this culmination of factors that build and build and build until they push the tree over the edge. So I've talked a little bit about structure pruning. And the reason we do structure pruning is because if you noticed on the American beech tree over here, we were pruning off, pinky-sized limbs. When you get to a mature tree that needs a large diameter limb removed, 8 to 10 inches, like on this red maple here, we run into issues where, of course, wood decay fungi show up. Pioneering fungi show up first, and they'll start to degrade that wood. then oftentimes we'll see secondary fungi come in and further deteriorate that wood. Now that becomes a problem because then suddenly this wood is soft. You may not be able to see it. There's actually an ant already in here making a home because why not? It's a great little area. But the problem is, as this rot continues to spread, you can run into issues with major canopy still being blown over as a result of a major structural defect. Now, a lot of times in the urban world, we do have to limb up our trees. It's a reality. But what I would encourage you to do is prune that tree early for what you know it's going to be, where you know you want that tree. Because here's our reality. This is what we consider a completely compartmentalized limb. A proper arborist cut was made at the branch protection zone, and that is just an area of actively compartmentalizing cells that allows a tree to fully close that injury, as opposed to here, where we do see closure happening, but it's happening at a much slower rate due to the size of that limb. I've seen trees that can take 30 years to close limbs. So once you get above the size of your shoulder, about 4 inches, where your arm meets your shoulder, you're probably making an improper cut on the tree. Don't come in and remove 10, 12-inch limbs off the trees unless there is a very, very solid foundation as to why. The second reason we like to prune early in life is because of what I mentioned previously. You know, once you get to a 20-year-old tree that has issues of codominance, no arborist can fix this. There are ways for us to remediate this slightly. We can bolt the tree, we can put loose cables in the tree, but we can't fix this issue. So we have what's known as included bark, and that's this swelling issue here. Now, over the long haul, this is a very weak branch union. It's, of course, a very tight branch union, and as a result of that, a lot of times, you've probably seen sugar maples. They do this very regularly. You come home and half of your trees laying in your yard all of a sudden. One question I get on this a lot is, should I cut this limb off or this limb off? Absolutely not. Don't ever remove one of your 2 major codominant stems once a tree is of this size. At an early age, absolutely. At a mature age, do not. Instead, consult with an arborist or reach out to me if you need, and we can talk about issues on how to solve this. And we're going to wrap up, Natalie, in the pin oak grove right here beside us.
And we're getting some good questions in the chat box too. So you're very good on time, guys. And once you get done with the pin oak discussion, Lee, I'll toss you a few questions.
All right, so now we've moved over to a little different area of the gardens, and we're underneath a grove of 4 really majestic pin oaks. Pin oaks are one of my favorite species. Now, they do have some common ailments that we see in the landscape. Bacterial leaf scorch can be a problem with them. But if you have a happy, healthy pin oak tree, it really has the potential to live for a long time. They're wonderful urban species. They do great in yards. They really do well in the urban environment. So I would highly recommend pin oaks. Now, when I mentioned trunk flare over on the American beach, you know, it's a little more pronounced here. This is a spectacularly planted tree. We see really nice radial spacing. The tree, of course, is developed over the long haul. But what we do see is, of course, a lot of limbs that have been removed in previous years. I'm not sure if y'all can see that laser pointer, but pin oak is a very rapidly growing species, and they do have the potential to compartmentalize those wounds entirely. So I would encourage you here again, you know, pin oaks are wonderful species. What we commonly see, and the reason why a lot of these lower limbs have probably been cut, is as a result of dead limbs in the lower canopy. As oak trees, particularly pin oaks, as they expand their size, their girth, their width, a lot of times they will cast heavy shade on those lower branches. And as a result of that, those limbs no longer meet their photosynthetic requirements. And a lot of times we run into issues where those limbs will eventually die. Now, on pin oak, I highly suggest the removal of dead limbs. These limbs are certainly of a size that can injure either property or life. So a lot of times going in and culling out some of these larger dead limbs that we see, so removing these, of course, can prevent a lot of major problems later in life. In addition to that, of course, it reduces the chances of any potential infections invading the tree. We want to remove dead limbs as early as we can. Now, when do we prune mature trees? The old adage is whenever the saw is sharp, right? But that to a point is true. A tree can be pruned most any time, but when we're talking mature tree pruning, I want you to think twice about it. Consult with someone, and then just make sure that that timing is correct. Dead limbs can be removed any time of year, no problem. But certainly for any, major structural changes, I want you to do that when the tree's dormant during a period of, physiological dormant state. With that, I think I'll move over to any questions. I would like to give a shout out to, of course, the Knox County Facebook page. If you have additional questions, I post a video series there every week on Monday mornings, Talking Trees with Lee, where I highlight something in the landscape. Also, Knox County has an Instagram page and a YouTube page as well. So feel free to reach out to me should you have any other questions. And Natalie, I'll take any questions I can hopefully answer.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to try to go slightly in chronological order, but we had a couple of people who were asking about the first small beech tree that you showed, and they noticed that its, its central leader was leaning a little bit. Is there any way that you would address that at this early stage?
So that's actually a great question. I get a lot of questions about, well, should I ratchet it back and strap it to a stake? Don't do that. Trees are phototropic organisms. They are going to chase sunlight. Now, it's likely that that leader developed that lean early in life. It was probably sitting maybe up here in the hoop house with, shade on the backside. So it may well have grown up at an angle. What you can do in order to help fix that is to reduce or make reduction cuts on that side of the tree that has the most aggressive lean. That in turn will help to encourage more of an upright system on that tree. Trees are self-righting organisms. Pretty much the less interaction we have with them, the better off they're going to be.
All right. The next question, I'm sure that this is one that you've probably gotten before. I want to give you a chance to address it. It is, how do arborists feel about spray-on pruning sealer?
Another great question. So that's actually a myth. It expedites the amount of rot behind that paint. An injury is much like an injury on you and I. If we had a cut on our arm, there's no way we would want to cover that injury and never allow that an opportunity to air dry. Those cells need to compartmentalize. And as such, that may mean they get wet. It may mean they dry out. But we don't cover any paint on any injuries anymore. It's been disproven, and it's been shown to actually expedite rot within the tree.
All right, great question. And we are, let's see, we're at about 20 after. I'm going to toss you one more, Lee. And it is very timely for our current weather conditions. The wind has cracked a large maple limb on a mature tree. What do you recommend for limbs that may be damaged but not completely down?
Yeah, so that's another really good one. So on a maple, it depends on the extent of the crack. If we're talking a horizontal limb, with a horizontal crack, a lot of times those cracks can actually be bolted back together. The problem is there may be a loss in some of that structural integrity. I generally tell people if there's not a target around that it can hit, leave it alone. Let the tree heal itself. trees are going to actively try and compensate for whatever injury that they sustain. Keep in mind, trees have been around for 300 million years. They're sessile, they can't move, so they have to adapt to their conditions. Now, if that limb does shed off, you know, it's not the end of the world for the tree oftentimes. But in general, I would probably tell you, if it's a minor crack, leave it alone. If it's a crack that's developed, that's created, you know, a pocket that's 2 or 3 inches, you could potentially consider bolting that together and then going out to the end of the limb and removing individual fingers. So we reduce the amount of weight that's now being held by that limb.
All right, thank you very much. So we have some other good questions in the chat box, and we're gonna kind of jump to the next section to make sure that we don't run out of time, but we'll save these. If we have time, we'll come back and also pass them on to Lee. So the fun thing about getting to travel kind of to different parts of the state for this series is that we are going to be able to highlight some of our UT gardens and some of our great horticultural sites across the state. And so before we kind of jump in to our next visit, I wanted to open up this next section and share with you a little bit of fun history of the gardens here in Knoxville. So these pictures are courtesy of Dr. Sue Hamilton. I talked to her yesterday and made sure that, that it was appropriate for me to share them. You know right now, our UT Gardens as a 3-branch system in Jackson and Crossville and here in Knoxville. And that is due to the growth and the leadership of Sue over the last few years. But what you might know them, right, as being focused on plant selection and as being very keen on plant sales and providing the opportunity to purchase some of those great trialed and selected plants. You know the UT Gardens as a home for fabulous interaction with volunteers across the state. And you're going to get to see a spotlight on all of this throughout the summer as a great place for youth education and all sorts of teaching. I'm going to move past that snake slide pretty quick. You know our 2 sites. So of course, this is a great shot from Jackson. Some of the fabulous work that Jason Reeves has done out there over the years. From Crossville, our Master Gardener led and initiated 3rd branch of the UT Gardens, which you'll also see some live shots from over the course of the summer. And so you know about what the kind of more mature UT Gardens is now. But you might not have necessarily known very much of the history. And so just in a brief kind of pictographic fashion, I want to share with you a little bit of that to kind of place this amazing site that we have around us here in Knoxville and also across the state. So this is the UT Gardens in the 1980s. And if y'all were doing horticulture in the 1980s, you knew that it was a bedding plant world, right? And so the UT Gardens really started as a part of the East Tennessee Research Station, right? So a research and education center right here on campus. And the beds were straight rows and they were doing annual trials. So some of those early efforts were due to the influence and the involvement in the All-American Selections Trial. If y'all don't know, this is Dr. Sue Hamilton right here in the early stages. So right here on campus was an All-American Selections Trial bed. This is the current site of the UT Gardens, and you can see a lot of straight rows and a lot of blooming annuals. As time went on, it grew, and so this is kind of the view, kind of looking from Neyland. For y'all who know Knoxville, right there is the holly hedge. So this gives you a sense of how much the gardens have changed. A whole lot of bright flowers from spring to fall. Right there, we got some great 1980s pansies, and you can see another aerial view. The campus itself looks a lot different. I'll be honest, there are some of these shots that I'm still trying to figure out where exactly they are. There's so many buildings that are different. This is classic James Newbern here, who is currently the interim director of the Knoxville Gardens. Art has been included for a long time, way back to the beginning. We were bringing in student and local artists' work, and of course, students themselves. So the early educational elements had a lot to do with just passing out brochures and providing people information. This is one of my favorite pictures, actually doing research on ivy, right? So a whole lot of replicated plots, which you would expect from a research station. As the 80s passed, the 90s came, and new perennial beds, planting beds were installed. This looks a whole lot different. The vet school and the vet hospital is much bigger than it was then. But you can now start to see that we're transitioning, right? Not just from straight rows, but from a lot of curving lines as well. And so a whole lot more planting beds are being introduced. In the 1990s, we're starting to get a little bit more of a clear entrance to the garden, right? It's not just a research station now, it's actually a designated garden. So this is the current site of the plaza. That's the parking lot where you currently enter. You can see the beginnings of that walkway. This is one of my favorites. You're going to hear here in a few minutes. Amy Hahn's going to talk about the Adopt-A-Bed program that has been reintroduced here at the gardens over the last few years, but it was present in the 1990s. And this is my favorite when we know it's the 90s, because you actually had to outlaw rollerblading. So we have a lot of now starting to get into woody ornamentals in our beds, the structures, the walkways. So it's becoming much more of a destination site rather than just a site for trial. I was doing horticulture as a teenager in the 90s, and so all of these geraniums and hanging baskets look very familiar, and I'm sure that that y'all are the same. So these were trials that were being done on hanging baskets. This is actually down where the new pavilion is right now. We're starting to see water features and gazebos, more paved entrance areas. This is actually also down along Neyland Drive. Students have always played a key role. This is the spot where the current labyrinth is. So that's actually looking out on Neyland Drive. A whole lot of shade gardens as the mature trees grew, and art has always also had a place in the garden. This is the old entrance. So once again, trying to formalize it, and now we're seeing the entrance of the 2000s. So a lot larger and more designed beds being incorporated. This is the current plaza, as y'all probably know it. And we see, you know, more woody beds along Neyland Drive. The crepe myrtles are getting larger and, of course, being pruned appropriately. Lee would approve of that structural pruning. The rose garden was installed in the 2000s, and this actually had to do with Dr. Mark Wyndham, one of our pathologists here at the Institute of Agriculture. And so those are a lot of rose selections that have performed well under our challenging climates. We have the rock garden, the new greenhouses that went in the 2000s. You know we're safely in the 2000s because we got lots and lots and lots of wave petunias. And this kind of provides the transition to the next section of our talk today. And so in the late 2009, 2010, the kitchen garden was actually installed. So this was a grant that was donated. Some of the landscape architecture students actually took part in some of the design of this. And so these are early pictures of the kitchen garden. And over the last few years, Holly Jones has been a key leader in some of the changes that have taken place in the kitchen garden. And so it's very much been her leadership and some of her artistic vision that's brought in some of what's going on in the kitchen garden. And that actually is the segue to our next presentation. I am now going to pass the mic, so to speak, to Rylan and Holly in the kitchen garden, and they're going to share with us a little bit both about that site, but also especially how Master Gardeners take part in what's going on here at the UT Gardens.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Well, I guess it's not noon yet, but we're getting close. We're braving the rain out here at UT Gardens and the kitchen garden. So my name's Rylan Thompson. If you haven't met me yet, I'm the Knox County Master Gardener Coordinator. I'm also a 4-H agent and a agriculture agent. So wear a few different hats. I'm going to let Holly introduce herself and what she does.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Holly Jones, and I manage our kitchen garden and our edible plant collection. And then I also do our social media, and I work with the education team, and I do event rentals. But my first love is the kitchen garden. So I'm out here about 15 hours a week, and I work with a lot of volunteers as well.
So what we're going to do, we're going to ask Holly some questions as we kind of walk around the outside of the kitchen garden. You know, if we have some time at the end, maybe we can get the inside of the kitchen garden. So when did the kitchen garden start? What's its background? How did it get started?
So it was first built in about 2011, and we got a grant from the UT Women's Philanthropy Group. So we wrote the grant for it, and we got it. And so, yeah, it's been here for about 9 years now.
Okay. And what, you tell us a little bit more why it was originally created for food production, and was it done more for research purposes?
I think the real vision was a demonstration garden, and we modeled it after the French potager style of gardening. So it's really about growing vegetables, fruits, herbs, cut flowers in a really ornamental way. So rather than just like in the backyard in straight lines, we wanted it to be like really pretty and ornamental. So lots of flowers. You'll notice a lot of purple, and so it's really trying to bring the edibles into a more ornamental garden style.
So we're going to kind of move around a little bit and let Holly talk, and then we'll ask Holly another question about the UT kitchen garden. So what are we looking at right now, Holly?
So this garden has been evolving over the past few years, and it used to be lawn, but about 4 years ago we killed all the grass using cardboard and wood chips and mulch, and then we started planting mostly woody edibles, perennial edibles. So this is my Asian persimmon, and it's a dwarf persimmon tree. And then we've got some loamy berries here, which are a little less common, but you can see the red cherry-like fruit coming on them. And I was really excited about them in particular because they are one of the only woody plants that fixes its own nitrogen. So the idea here is that it's producing food, and it's also maybe releasing a little bit of ambient nitrogen into the soil to help support the other plants that are growing there.
A great transition to our next question for Holly. She was highlighting the Master Gardener program and just volunteers in general that do the Adopt a Spot. So what role do Master Gardeners play out here with the UT Kitchen Garden other than you know, plantings and the Adopt a Spot? What other active roles do they take?
Well, like Kathy's a great example of someone who's taken like the Adopt a Spot to the next level. So last year she did this whole garden, you know, all the empty spots that we're going to plant with annuals. She planted with herbs that you would use for potpourri. And so we grew a potpourri garden. And at the end of the season, she had saved a lot of the flowers and foliage and herbs and dried them throughout the year. And then at the end of the season, she taught a class for the community, and we were able to use all of the herbs and flowers from potpourri garden to show people how to make potpourri, and they got to take it home. So that was really cool because it was like from seed to finish, the entire project.
Well, and you know, another highlight for Kathy, she was actually the UT volunteer or UT Gardens Volunteer of the Month last month, correct?
Yes.
So, you know, great shout out to one of our Master Gardeners. So now, is it only Knox County Master Gardeners that volunteer, or can other counties volunteer? How do you guys normally have your volunteers worked out?
Everybody's welcome to volunteer, and we regularly have people from, we have a lot of folks from Blount County, Master Gardeners from Blount County, and Hamblin County, and other surrounding counties as well. So we welcome all volunteers, Master Gardeners, just regular folks, anybody who wants to come. It's a great way to learn and to give back to the garden.
So if, let's say, a Master Gardener wanted to bring a friend, or if somebody that wasn't a Master Gardener volunteer, what would be the step to actually become a volunteer out here?
Probably the easiest thing to do is to just go to the website, and you'll see a pull-down menu at the top of our main page. There's a little Become a Volunteer tab, and then that has Alice Kimbrell's contact information, and she's the volunteer coordinator. And you just email her, and then she works you through the paperwork. And then you can either come whenever you want if you're an Adopt a Spot volunteer, or you can come to our regular sessions, which in the kitchen garden are Wednesday mornings from 9 to noon.
What's the future of the kitchen garden? That's the big question. What are your future plans? Do you have any, or what's your vision?
Well, this year, because of this pandemic that we're going through, we have resolved to donate the majority of the produce to local food banks. So we're working with Society of St. Andrew, and they've been coming and picking up our produce, and they distribute to 9 local food banks. We really just want to give back to the community and try to support the community. But we do sell a little bit of our produce in our self-serve fruit stand in there, and visitors really love that. It's a great way to get to taste some of the things that we're growing. And all the money that we get from the fruit stand goes right back into the kitchen garden. So it's a way to raise funds for the display garden. So we're going to do a little bit of both this year. We'll probably sell maybe like 30% of the produce to be sold in the fruit stand. 70% is going to get donated, to the community. So that's my short-term future. Long-term, get more sponsors, grow the garden bigger, collect more unusual edible plants, and bring in more students. We actually have food insecurity here on campus, and we're starting a new student-focused food bank in the fall. Not we're starting it, but the Office of Sustainability is starting it. And so my evolving goal is to get really involved with that, get the students more involved with growing the food here in the kitchen garden, and then supplying that to the student food bank so we can really support the students as well.
So if somebody wanted to sponsor or knew somebody that wanted to sponsor, how does that process actually work? Would they reach out to you, or would they reach out to James? What's that process for kitchen garden?
So yeah, you could reach out to me, and I could, connect you with the Office of Advancement or with James Newburn, our director, or you could go straight to James Newburn.
Okay, and then does the UT Kitchen Garden have its own Instagram, Facebook, or does it fall under UT Garden?
Yes, so we have our own Instagram account. It's awesome. Follow us on Instagram. And when we're really, mid-season, when we've got a lot of produce coming in, that's how we advertise what's in the fruit stand. So when we have all of our blackberries coming in, strawberries, figs, we'll put a post on Instagram, and you'll know come that day, and you can get some fresh produce.
Is there any questions so far that anybody might have?
Oh, yeah. We had some people who were asking for clarification about gummy berries. So we got that included.
Sure. Like, what do you want to know about them? You got to have 2 to get fruit. You need cross-pollination. And I've heard varying reports on flavor. Some people really like them. I had a grad student who made some jelly with them, and she said it was really good. They're a little bit astringent, so you really want to let them ripen really well before you eat them. And I've got 2 different varieties here. One is, I'm going to step in here. So this is Sweet Scarlet. And yeah, you can get right up on the fruit. It's like a little tart cherry, and it's got pretty good amount of, it's got a pretty big seed inside there, but there's a pretty good amount of fruit. And yeah, it's a mild, sweet flavor. Really easy to grow.
All right, cool. Hey, we are getting some requests in the chat box to at least do a little bit of a walk through the kitchen garden. Somebody has already noticed that there are some kiwis back there. Have you harvested very much off of those, Holly?
The which?
The kiwis.
Yeah, last year we had our first good harvest. I didn't weigh it, so I can't tell you exactly how much it was, but it was, a few good handfuls. And it's taken about 4 years for these kiwis to start producing. So this is the male right here, and it is in flower. I don't know if you can see, they're pretty small flowers, but the female is over here. Get right up on that. There's some little fruit starting to form. So that's a little baby kiwi.
Yeah, we had some questions about some of your guys' social media accounts. And just so you know, when I send out the email that has this recording and those types of things in there, I'll make sure that we include Lee's social media information as well as Holly's. So So we'll get you all connected. Do you know the cultivar names of those kiwi right off the tip of your tongue? We had a question.
Yeah, the female is Natasha, and it's a green kiwi, and the male is Meader male, M-E-A-D-E-R. That's probably the most common male.
All right, that's excellent. And this actually provides us a really good transition point to our next presentation, because right to, well, my right, their left, is actually the herb spiral. And our final presentation today is actually coming to us from a Master Gardener volunteer here in Knoxville. So Amy Hahn, you may know from her Ask a Master Gardener and from a lot of her teaching and question activities, but she is also a Adopt a Spot volunteer who manages the herb spiral. And so we know y'all love herbs, and this was a great opportunity to kind of link together the gardens, Master Gardener volunteers, as well as herbs. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Amy, and she's going to share her screen and give you a little bit of horticultural and volunteer information about the herb spiral at the gardens.
Yes. Okay, me and my friend, Master Gardener friend, Marcia Griswold, adopted the herb spiral in 2018. I had wanted to volunteer more at UT Gardens, but the timing of the volunteer sessions never worked. So with the Adopt a Spot program, you adopt a garden or an area within UT Gardens, and with consultation with one of the staff, you take care of it. Alice Kimbrell started that program, and I think 2018 was the first year of it. And at that point, my friend Marcia was the Knox County Master Gardener liaison with UT Gardens. So we adopted the spot, and when we first adopted it, the stone you see on the left, you could only see the very bottom corner of it. And we weren't aware that it had been built in 2010 in honor of Tony Schultz, who went by Schultz. He was a long-time self-taught horticulturist, and the company that he worked for wanted to do something to remember him. So they consulted with Sue Hamilton and put together the herb spiral. So why an herb spiral? This is an early picture of it that I found. I'm not exactly sure of the year, but you'll be able to tell the difference between it and the current garden. So why an herb spiral? A lot of people in permaculture are interested in it, but that's a whole nother story. The verticalness of it makes really good use of space and water. It's easy to construct in a smaller scale than this one. This is an unusually large herb spiral. And you're creating different microclimates by the construction of it. The top tends to be very dry, even in the weather we've had this year and last year. The bottom is considerably wetter. The south side is nearly full sun, while the north side has a lot of shade. So you have a lot of different microclimates to work with. So some herbs that don't do well in our area actually do well in the herb spiral. Oh, that was my picture for the structure. Okay, so this is where it's located. You already saw them walking by the kitchen garden. And you can see the herb spiral is that bright red star. It's on a south sloping, gently south sloping. It has 3 1/4 turns, is 18 feet in diameter, and 5 feet tall. So now for the part you probably all want, the plants. There are over 30 perennials, and every year we plant in quite a few annual herbs into it. These are ones that are destined to go in, at least half of them. Some of them are going in my garden. So this was the herb spiral in April of 2018. When we took it over, we spent the first year digging out Bermuda grass and are still fighting it in the middle of the rocks. So there's this, okay, that's the south side. That'll be the hot side. That's the southeast, which is where the stone is. And we tend to let herbs go to seed there. You can see parsley and cilantro going to seed on the right side. And on the left is Italian oregano. So that's the north side. We're working toward, you generally work toward having more leafy herbs on the north side. What you see a lot of is, at this point, is volunteer lemon balm chives and garlic chives. We've been in the process of moving those. And then now to the southwest. This must be after we cut back the oregano in September. So it changes through the season. We're also working toward having something in bloom every season of the year. So that is May of 2019, which is pretty similar to where it is right now. One of the things we're doing is I'm trying to get some good plant labels, because as an educational space, labeling is important. Now here we're back onto the north side. And on the north side, I always do a basil trial. So I think this year there were 1, 2, 3, like 5 or 6 different kinds of basil in there. Usually lemon, cinnamon, Genovese, and whatever else I have. This is in May of 2019. And that's a little visitor we had in the lower rosemary. There's June, when all the coneflowers in full bloom. And we will be digging out some of those coneflowers as they tend to self-seed in there. And we've got a bit of an overpopulation. And there's back to the north side. You can see the basils in June. They've grown quite a bit from when they were first planted. And the lavender is in full bloom. Lavender does very well on the top of that herb spiral, as does French tarragon. And this is just a couple of weeks ago when our rosemary was in bloom. And we have 2 different kinds of we actually have 3 different kinds, 2 upright and 1 prostrate rosemary in that bed. And so here's looking up at it. We do have a couple plants, if you notice on the right, that's actually fireworks goldenrod that we will be removing, as they really don't fit in our definition of an herb. So thank you for exploring the T. Schultz herb spiral with me.
So look for some pictures and some promos about our Search for Excellence winners. And then a fun part of really most of the rest of our Friday focus are going to be featuring not only great horticulture, like you heard about herbs and trees today, but also Master Gardener sites with Master Gardener coordinators from around the state. And we're also going to do Search for Excellence spotlights. And so it's going to be a good mix of content and service and sharing. You're going to hear from agents, you're going to hear from Master Gardeners. And so we've got a lot of our lineup for the next few months already in place. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be live from Greenville, Murfreesboro, Memphis. I was told that July 3rd is actually a holiday for UT employees. So that may actually be a video rather than a live day. We're going to be in Jackson, which is, of course, the second branch of our UT Gardens, Chattanooga, and we are also going to bring in our third branch of the UT Gardens in Crossville. So it's gonna be a fun summer, and I'm gonna try to travel as much and get as much of the state covered and as many folks involved as possible.